Shortly before the November elections, we introduced you to a group of students aiming to create civil spaces for difficult political conversations. We wanted to check back in with them in the wake of November 5th. So, joining us for a progress report is Hannah Gerber, president of the Political Forum at Flagler College. Good morning, Hannah.
Good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you. We're also joined by Manny Marcantoni, the forum's vice president. Good morning, Manny.
Good morning.
And Gabriel James, the group's public outreach coordinator. Hey, Gabriel, welcome back.
Hi, Ann. It's great to be back.
It's great to have you. So, Hannah, start just by telling us a little bit about your experience on election day.
It was definitely a crazy day because, of course, we didn't know for a really long time the results. So I think we were kind of wanting to have a group meeting that day on that Wednesday. So we were kind of scrambling together and trying to figure out how we can get our club to meet, which we ended up doing, which was really nice. And I think overall it was a very calming day as we tried to make it as stress free as possible.
And why was it important for you to have a group meeting after the election? What were you going for?
Um, I think because of the different emotions that would come with either way, just having everybody meet, we can kind of talk about the reality of things and, you know, have a safe space to talk about what people are feeling.
hmm Manny, was this the first election that you were able to participate in, presidential election?
Yes, it was.
And so, how did it go for you?
It was good. I voted by mail, and it was a really smooth process getting my ballot. Yeah, being the first time voting, I actually really appreciated having to vote at home with the mail ballot because I had time to really look into every decision I was making rather than feeling pressured in the moment to make one. So I really actually enjoyed my first time voting.
Yeah. And it was a really complicated ballot. It was a long ballot. There were a lot of races, a lot of kind of more obscure races, I think, for people, judge retention, the, ballot initiatives that were on, some of which were complicated and some of which were really high profile, including, abortion rights and marijuana legalization, recreational marijuana, both of which failed. Um, but yeah, it took some time, I would guess, to go through the ballot.
It did. I vote in South Carolina, so I actually wasn't able to
Gotcha.
participate in those decisions. But being here and those decisions do affect me. I did look into a lot of them and was interested in the results.
Yeah. And Gabe, Hannah alluded to the fact that there was this desire to get together, talk through the election results. There were a lot of campuses in this country that caught some flack for sort of a reaction, that I think some people felt was a little bit coddling of students. There was having hot cocoa and sessions to kind of connect and to, in some cases grieve the election results. Um, what was the vibe of your meeting? How did you conduct it? What was the sensibility primarily of the students who were there?
Well, I would say that at our meeting that we had, we didn't have a whole lot of emotional sort of upheaval or anything. I think the general feel on campus was a little more so coddling of students. We had a lot of students who were breaking down the day after the election. We had professors doing a lot of students coming to professors' offices to talk about the results of the election and what kind of options they have. A lot of people felt like their rights had been stripped from them. So there was certainly a really strange sort of new type of polarization that took place on campus as you had Trump voters who felt very empowered by the results of the election, and then you had Kamala supporters who were completely distraught after November 6th.
And how, Anna, did the ballot amendment regarding abortion impact the students? Was that also a salient issue that people were responding to, or are they primarily focused on the presidential candidates?
I think that was the main issue. I would say just getting the general consensus that I got is that was the one to really look at. Um, and I definitely think there was some heartbreak and some, like Gabe said, a lot of people feeling just breaking down over it because it is that feeling of getting, your rights stripped away in that sense. So, um, I feel like on campus there was definitely a lot of that was the one that we were all watching. I know I was watching that one just to see, how it ended up. Um, and I think that was like the main discussion I had in class with a lot of professors of is it or is it not.
Mhm.
That was kind of the main one because it's just so new because it's the first time it's been on the ballot. Um,
And also an issue that will likely impact a lot of people your age,
right,
male or
yes,
female. Yeah.
absolutely. So,
And so, Manny, did most of the kids that you know who were able to vote, do they actually vote?
I think the majority of people that I know voted. I think that there were some difficulties for some people getting their mail ballots. I personally had a really smooth experience, but I know for some people it's really difficult to go to your local voting office, or some counties make it really complicated. So I think the people that could vote that I know did vote.
And complicated how? You mean because students are perhaps coming from out of state, or what was the obstacle?
Yes, I think a lot of out of state students had issues. Maybe not a lot, that might be an exaggeration, but I think definitely there were issues, things getting lost in the mail, things such as that, or not sending them out in time. But I will say that the majority of people that I know did vote.
Is there anything, any lessons that you would take as a group for the next election cycle? And obviously, you will most likely not still be at Flagler. Presumably, will have graduated in another 4 years. But lessons that perhaps this group going forward could take in order to ease some of those obstacles or to better prepare students for the election? What would you like to do differently, if anything?
I would say in retrospect, I would have liked to have a meeting similar to the one that we had after before and discuss more of our options in a serious way. Also, I think it would be really interesting to get information about the locations where our members are voting and not just Florida. I think Florida had a really interesting ticket. There was a lot of really important issues that people were voting on, but most of the people that are members of the political forum are not Florida voters. So I think that even though those are really important issues, we could have talked more about what were they gonna be voting on. So in retrospect, I would have liked to do that.
What they would be voting on in their home states?
Yes.
Was there much discussion at all about people trying to register to vote in Florida, Gabe, if they were from an outside state where they were registered in order to impact local choices like the ballot amendments?
So you mean people trying to register here in Florida to have an impact?
People like Hannah, yeah, or excuse me, like Manny, who live somewhere else, but presumably would have the opportunity to, as a resident here, register here instead.
Well, I wouldn't say I saw like this like an overwhelming amount of people trying to do that. I'm sure it was happening. I did hear some things about that in class discussions about people being confused about should I register here in Florida so that I can have an impact in the state that I'm actually living in, or should I travel back home? So I'm sure that that was certainly a large dilemma for some students who have to make that choice if they're here on campus, and maybe they're going home in a few years, or because it's a huge decision that you're making for the state.
Sure. A lot of students from Flagler College, in my experience, stick around too in St.
I
Augustine.
was
And
Right.
gonna say, yeah, we're getting to that point where we have to kind of decide what we're gonna do after we graduate. So I've heard it from like one or two people of having that conversation of, well, I'm gonna live here for the next 20 years, so maybe I should register to vote in Florida now because now's the time to do it.
Mm. If you're just joining us, we are talking to the students behind the Political Forum at Flagler College. It's a group devoted to civil discourse on campus. You can join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect, wjct.org, or reach out on social media. So I want to ask you about whether you felt prepared for the outcome, in the sense, Hannah, that some people in your group would not be happy with the results, others might be very happy with the results, and trying to manage the relationship there, given that your goal is to have a civil conversation.
Right. I know I was definitely a little bit stressed out about it. Of is it I wanted us to meet, but is it really smart for us to meet right after the election? I would say the way we made the call is that we've had a lot of regulars come to our meetings, and it's always been very civil, and it's always been people who are actively looking for a nonpartisan space. So whether they're upset or not, they want to hear the other perspective, or they want to talk about, you know, their opinion, but in just like a calming and opening way. Um, but I was definitely nervous leading up to it of, are we gonna have, like, people fighting with each other? So we try to do a lot of, like, nice activities, like, we had pizza, so hopefully people would be calm after that. And then we did like a little silly debate with like little random questions just to get people kind of back into the groove of life and try not to just stress about the results.
And do you study interaction uh, techniques or meeting techniques that people have tried to employ to foster civil conversations, or do you just kind of wing it? Like, how do you manage your own approach to those meetings?
Right. I think because we are new, there's a little bit of winging it involved. Also, I know Manny and I, and even Gabe too, we feel so passionately about it that we want to make it work no matter what. We probably should study some techniques just in case. We've had it very peaceful so far, and we've had amazing conversations with people from different sides of the spectrum. So I think in the future, we definitely want to maybe talk to different people and try to get more advice on that. But as of right now, we're doing pretty good.
And Manny, who picks the topic? Who kind of shapes the discussion once you're there gathered and you've eaten the pizza?
It's a little bit of all of us. Hannah and I always plan before if we aren't able to meet. Well, so all of our executive board meets before all of our meetings. But if for any reason we aren't able to, Hannah and I have planned out what the discussion topics are going to be. So for that meeting that she's referring to, we created a slideshow of silly debate topics like is a hot dog a sandwich so that we could all just talk about them together. But when it comes to those more serious topics,
Is
we're
is a hot dog a sandwich or not?
I mean, I said no, but some people said yes, but
There's
I
a
think
case to be
no.
made. Okay.
There is for both.
All right.
But a lot of the times we're talking about these things in class, so we definitely take inspiration from that and our professors. Sometimes we do have professors come speak as well, so they are leading the discussion. And then sometimes we've had people come in with discussion topics that they want us to talk about in that moment, and we all research it together.
And so when you're having these conversations as this group, Gabe, are you also seeing some of these discussions reflected in class? How have your professors responded to this election season? How have they managed their own emotions about the outcome since the election day?
So there's some professors that are very neutral about talking about the results of the election. The professor that we sort of based our club's discussions off of has a very unique way of kind of keeping his own views very hidden. So it's like a mystery to try and figure out w- w- how he particularly leans, and that's fosters great classroom discussion because we're all able to kind of talk about what we think without feeling like there is pressure coming from the teacher, any sort of uh, like type of way that he's trying to lean the discussion. Though there are other professors that have a tendency to, I don't want to use the word indoctrination because that's not what they're trying to do, but there's this, some people might say that, this sense of pushing their views and their values onto students to maybe because they're so passionate about it, maybe they don't even realize they're doing it. But especially after the election, it's more frequent with people being so distraught or passionate about the results of the election.
And Hannah, I think the last time we spoke, you said that you worried, or you at least felt that there was a some diminishment of more conservative views on campus, or pressure that perhaps people who had those views felt because they were outnumbered or perhaps less vocal. Give me a pulse about how that has changed, if at all, since the election.
I don't know if it's necessarily changed. I think I talked about last time too of the pressure of a lot of people who may be conservative or lean one way of saying something in front of their professor and their professor not agreeing and kind of worried about that aspect. Um, I think after the election, I definitely think there was a little bit of an upheaval of people being more confident talking about it. Um, which I think is a great thing at the end of the day of people just wanting to share their opinion. I don't know if that's necessarily gonna stick true forever, but um, I think I think they started to get a little bit more vocal on campus for sure.
And that, the youth vote, Manny, really did, in many ways, they supported Kamala Harris by a margin, but much less so than in previous elections. I mean, in previous elections, Democratic candidates have held over 60% of the youth vote, and in this case, she got 54%. which is, a big drop. What do you sense as what was most responsible for that shift in the youth vote? What do you think that the kids on campus and the kids that you know are voting on primarily?
I think a lot of people were voting on the Florida amendments that were there. I know that they didn't pass, but I also know that they got more than 50% of the votes. I think a lot of people were focused on social issues rather than candidates. But at the same time, I think a lot of people were voting for candidates and not for parties this time. I wasn't expecting the outcome because of kind of the sentiment that I see on campus.
In the presidential race?
Yes. So I don't really have a sense of that.
Mhm. And Gabe, one of the big stories after this election, the results was the incoming president's appeal to young men, which he apparently had good success with in terms of reaching that demographic. A lot of work with, Twitch streamers and celebrities and rappers and people who are kind of known as podcast bros, but, reaching through social media channels pretty effectively to reach young men. Did you feel that shift happening with your own group of peers?
Certainly, the appeal of the right in this election with youth voters through social media was incredibly the right was incredibly effective with it. They are much better at being attractive on social media than the left is. I think that's pretty objective. There's so many right-wing influencers, Charlie Kirk, Steven Crowder, Ben Shapiro, all these names, I could go on, and I could not name you even a couple left-wing influencers. And I look at all sorts of social media. I'm always trying to analyze the media stage, and what the left did that was sort of they tried to do this with a lot of the celebrity endorsements towards the in the last few weeks of the election, and it came off just being incredibly synthetic and bought and paid for.
Mm.
That was something I think threw off a lot of young people because Taylor Swift voters or Cardi B voters or Usher, or not voters but supporters, a lot of these people knew what the left was trying to do, trying to just buy out these celebrities to endorse them, while the right has been doing very subtle social media operations for years now, and it was just much more maybe it just felt much more genuine than what the left tried to cram in into 3 weeks.
Interesting. And Hannah, I wonder too if our expectations have changed of what a candidate delivers. I know that there's some people that said, built on the way that they're accustomed to consuming social media, that Donald Trump had better clips, he had better uh, slogans, kind of delivered these moments that strike young people perhaps differently in terms of how they consume social media and what they are looking for or appreciate in anybody that's a social media figure.
Right. I think I don't know why my whole, like, TikTok was Kamala Harris's TikTok all the time, so I definitely saw a lot of that. Um,
The algorithm.
yes. Um, but I I think no matter what, that's the way to reach young voters, is to get on social media and to, play the TikTok game and, have those clips because that's what and it we talk about is we kinda talk about more of the funnier stuff of, like, "Did you see what this person just did?" And it gets the conversation leaning towards that candidate of, "Oh, they just went on the news and said this crazy thing," but it's having more people talk about them. So I think especially with young voters, I know me specifically, that social media aspect of it is huge,
Yeah.
and that's, that because that's the first thing that we see.
And Manny, I want to ask you too, just about how students are geared towards moments that I think in older generations might provoke shock, but perhaps are maybe just more amusing in a generation of kids who've been raised digesting moments like that. And I'm thinking in particular about the comment that the incoming president made about cats and dogs, which I think initially was greeted with this sort of like aghast reaction in the mainstream media, and then later almost became kind of like a meme that perhaps was found more amusing than concerning among particularly young people or young men?
I think a lot of the reason for that, and I think this speaks to a lot of our generation, is we find humor in those. You said it was so shocking. We find humor in that. Of course, it wasn't funny at first, but then people turned it into a joke, and then it almost helped their campaign. At least that's the perception that I had. At first, it was like, we cannot believe he said that. But then once it becomes funny, so it's people on social media can really twist the things into helping them, even though it hurt them at first. And I think to what Hannah said about how that's how you reach people our age, I think the ability to switch the same exact clip from bad to good is really powerful.
That's really interesting. We've got a call from Susan in St. Augustine. Good morning, Susan. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning. My question is, what would be some of the main reasons that the students did vote Republican? Did they understand the consequences regarding the policies of Donald Trump and our democracy at stake? And do they think Musk or Zuckerberg from X and Facebook influenced the election?
Good question, Susan. Who wants to take that?
I could comment on that. I think that the that Donald Trump's campaign appealed, even though it may have been very demagogue-ish, it appealed certainly economically to young people who are struggling right now. That's sort of the general conception. The economy was what Trump really ran on. He really blew up things like immigration to make it an issue at everyone's dinner table, even though it's affecting a much smaller percentage than it's perceived. Although the reason that I think young people voted in higher numbers for Donald Trump this year was because the Democrats really left a lot of the middle class behind when that's traditionally not been what they do. A lot of people vote Democrat because they're the working class, because they believe in the rights of people and they believe in honesty. And this year, it just didn't seem like that. Yes, Kamala ran a really quick campaign, so she had to do whatever she had to do. But the lack of interviews and the lack of honesty in a lot of the things that she said, again, like I said earlier, seemed very synthetic. And Donald Trump, even though he is completely outrageous sometimes with his rhetoric, just seems like a more honest person, and like you're getting the real him when you listen to him speak and when you see what he's doing. And I think that is appealing to young people.
Interesting. Hannah, just as a final thought, I mean, are you encouraged about the future of civil discourse given your experience with the forum going forward? I mean, where do you see it going, and what advice do you have for people who are still trying to get there?
I really do see it going. And I hope that it's something that, you know, goes past the three of us, and it's something that has its own kind of legacy because it's such an amazing idea. And I know it was our idea, so I'm saying it like that. But it's such an amazing idea on college campuses to have a group that is just open about everything because there's so many, you know, Republican clubs and Democrat clubs that there's not just one thing where people who may not even have a side who just want to learn about topics. So I'm really hopeful for the future, especially, I mean, we're juniors, so we're kind of, our clock's kind of ticking on college a little bit. Um, so I know, especially next year, we want it to get a little bit bigger. And my advice for it is, you know, with anybody, college or not, you know, high school or out of college, is finding a group of people where, you know, even if you don't all get along, but you can all have those conversations of, hey, this is going on. I don't really understand this. Does somebody know? Let's talk about it. Because that's the only way we're going to learn about politics and everything.
Well, Hannah Gerber, Manny Marcantoni, Gabriel James, thanks so much for coming back. We appreciate it, and best of luck to you during finals.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Great to come back.
All right.